table, I think, and people just want to see if I fell down after I left the commission. You should know that the TMI continues to line up exciting luncheon speakers for our series. Next month, on July 23rd, we'll hear from Paul Gallant, Managing Director, TMT Policy, TD Cohen. Many of you have expressed interest in inviting a guest who shares a communications investment perspective. We are fortunate that Paul, who many of you know, will be able to share his take on market reactions and exposures within the larger communications and technology industries, including policy decisions emanating from Washington, D.C. As many of you have heard me say, TMI resides at the intersection of the dynamic media industry and key public policy issues involving the First Amendment and American democracy. A central component of that is how the government treats American over-the-air broadcasters, including public broadcasting. As I look back, I realized that I spent an inordinate amount of time in public service focused on public broadcasting, issues involving government funding, content commitments and obligations, competition with commercial broadcasting and underwriting, spectrum use and licensing, must carry burdens on other platforms, appointments to governing boards, and so on. There was always something in play. Public broadcasting certainly brought out strong feelings and opinions, many of which continue today. These tend to expose a tension between the policy-making side and the practical programming output of individual public broadcasting stations. And it generates unique and substantial First Amendment questions when the government is a financier of the organization. This seems like a perfect time to turn to today's program. TMI is incredibly honored to have as our guest speaker, Ms.Kate Riley, President and CEO of America's Public Television Stations, a role she's held since October 2024. Previously, she served as Director of Government Relations and Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for APTS since May 2010. Prior to joining APTS, Ms. Riley held several leading positions in the House of Representatives for California members. She's a graduate of Marquette University with a degree in political science, Spanish, and writing-intensive English. I actually had to look that one up. Many of you may not know that DMV in Arlington, more specifically, was home to Ms. Riley's youth, living down just the street from Westover Library in North Arlington. Please join me in welcoming our guest speaker to the Media Institute to share insights on the pressing issues in the public broadcasting industry. Ms. Riley, the floor is yours.
Commissioner O'Reilly. All of us in public television appreciate your thoughtful engagement and support throughout your career and you continuing to think about public television as an important part of the media landscape. I can't think of a better person to continue the Media Institute's important work focused on the First Amendment and communications policy than Mike, so thanks for continuing to lead this great organization. And it's been a very busy year on both of those topics, the First Amendment and communications policy, and it has been a very busy year for local public television stations as well. The public media system is a unique, decentralized system that has numerous strengths. Although one weakness is the difficulty people have in understanding our system and how it differs from other media entities. So I thought that might be a good place to start. Every local public television station is locally controlled and operated. There are about 170 public television licensees operating approximately 350 full-power transmitters and 580 TV translator stations across the country. Collectively, they serve 97% of the American population with a free over-the-air signal. That's an incredible reach and one that is very critical to service that Americans rely on. These licenses are held by local entities, in many cases a community nonprofit organization that was created specifically for that purpose, or an educational entity like a university or a school board or a state government agency. These local public television stations are independent organizations with local autonomy that produce and select non-commercial programs that serve their unique communities' needs and interests. Each station airs a mix of different programming from different sources. Some programs are created locally by the station. Others may be acquired from nearby stations or independently produced by programmers or acquired from national programmers, which you've heard of: American Public Television, National Educational Telecommunications Association, or ANITA, and of course PBS. In addition to programming, local public television stations offer a wide range of local services that stretch far beyond the broadcast. From local partnerships to provide life-saving public safety communication services, to connecting children and families with learning opportunities, providing endless hours of teacher professional development, and convening communities and connecting them to experts to navigate the issues facing each community, like the opioid or the youth mental health crises. These local public television stations are trusted partners and a lifeline in their communities. Local stations are not affiliates. National programmers like PBS or APT or ANITA do not hold any broadcast licenses, and nor do they control the decisions of local public television stations. My organization, America's Public Television Stations, or APTS, represents these local public television stations and their interests. The stations were founded to serve the unique needs of their local communities and to ensure that all Americans have free access to local information and educational content. You might wonder, when did this all get started? Well, the first public television station went on the air in May of 1953, KUHT in Houston, and the first statewide public broadcasting network, Alabama Public Television, was launched in 1955. Both events taking place long before the Public Broadcasting Act was signed in November 1967, which ultimately led to the creation of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and before the incorporation of PBS in 1969. These local public television stations throughout the country are the heart and soul of the public television system. They provide unique and essential services that are tailored to the distinctive needs of their communities, with a public service mission deeply rooted in public safety, education, and community connections. In public safety, for example, California's local public television stations have worked together with the California Office of Emergency Services to develop a datacasting pathway to transmit early earthquake warnings over the broadcast spectrum instead of solely over the internet. In the pilot phase, datacasting early earthquake warnings to receivers reduced the delivery time of these alerts from 30 seconds to less than 1 second. That is a critical amount of time when you are expecting an earthquake, and it is important for saving lives. New Mexico PBS has used datacasting in both ATSC 3.0 and ATSC 1.0 to distribute emergency response information in areas impacted by wildfires. The station's ATSC 3.0 signal includes advanced emergency information and advanced emergency alert capability, allowing the station to provide real-time data customized to the region or type of emergency, as well as non-emergency information such as school closings, traffic updates, and other community-specific alerts that the people in that area need and rely on to stay safe. And PBS North Carolina, in collaboration with the Department of Homeland Security and others, has developed a digital paging system using ATSC 3.0 that reduces the amount of time needed to dispatch information to first responders throughout North Carolina. In addition to this being faster, the broadcast area also covers regions that don't have strong cell service, so that helps ensure that first responders actually receive these pages and can act to save lives in their communities. In education, Kentucky Educational Television created a GED prep course, which is the largest nonprofit GED program in the country, helping tens of thousands of second chance learners get their high school equivalency diploma. And at Reno PBS in Nevada, they work with schools and educators to provide free, state standards aligned curiosity classroom workshops in STEM and literacy for pre-K through 4th grade. The program provides all materials and a trained facilitator. And in a single year, PBS Reno held 6,700 of these workshops, reaching over 128,000 students with innovative and engaging lessons. For over the 50% of American 3- and 4-year-olds who do not attend preschool, Free educational content from their local public television station broadcast directly into their homes every day helps ensure that they are ready to succeed in school. And over 100 studies have shown that public television's scientifically researched kids' educational programming helps kids learn key math and literacy concepts and closes the achievement gap. In Community Connections, Lakeland PBS in Bemidji, Minnesota serves 7,500 square miles in northern and central Minnesota, and they provide a local nightly news program that is the only local television news service in the region, and that includes significant portions of 4 Native American reservations. Local news and information in rural regions is critically important for community connections, and local public television stations build community connections by shining a light on hometown heroes and achievements. Like in Nebraska, Nebraska Public Media airs high school championship games from all conference classes in baseball, boys and girls basketball, boys and girls bowling, football, girls and boys soccer, softball, girls and boys swimming and diving, volleyball, and boys and girls wrestling. In a state that spans 450 miles east to west, it's impossible for some fans to travel long distances to watch their town's team compete. But through free public television, they have a front row seat inside the arena. Further west, in mountainous terrain, Idaho Public Television provides gavel-to-gavel coverage of the state legislature, ensuring that citizens throughout the state that may never be able to travel to Boise have a first-person view of the proceedings that impact their daily lives. Idaho is just one of many local public television stations that provide this type of state legislative coverage, connecting viewers with their elected officials throughout the state. These services are just a few examples of the many ways local public television stations meet fundamental needs in their communities. This work is on the ground and in depth. These stations are trusted and ingrained in their local communities. There are similar stories in every state and from every local public television station. This work is essential. And this work is only possible due to local public television stations' commitment to universal service to all Americans, including in rural and remote areas, and their commitment to providing truly educational, non-commercial local content and services with no subscription required. In the vast and ever-evolving media landscape, there continues to be a critical need for universal access to free, local, educational, non-commercial services provided by local public television stations. So, as you might expect, it's incredibly costly to maintain transmitters and translators to ensure free over-the-air service and access to all of this information during disasters throughout the most rural parts of our country. And it's very costly to create and provide local educational resources that make truly educational content relentlessly tested at every stage to ensure that kids are developing core learning skills and are prepared for success. And one of the most expensive undertakings for a public television station is the creation of local content and local programs that reflect their community's history, shared experiences, accomplishments, and future aspirations. Yet local public television stations are steadfastly committed to these services, regardless of their expense, and these services are at the core of our public service mission. Local public television stations are not for profit. They raise money and secure funding so that they can invest it right back into the work that's needed in their community. These services have always been made possible by a public-private partnership. Each local station secures funding from their community through individual contributions, viewers like you, underwriting support from local businesses, other charitable donations, and foundations, and state funding in some cases, and until last year, from federal funding. The public-private partnership has allowed public television stations to reach rural areas where there is no commercial incentive to be there. They are ensuring that all Americans have access to local media that provides life-saving information in emergencies. The public-private partnership has made it possible for local public television stations to invest in the research and development of scientifically proven, effective, needed, and trusted educational content and services. The public-private partnership has enabled local public television stations to tell the stories of their communities that are often overlooked, from historical documentaries to local public affairs and local sports coverage. The public-private partnership is essential to the continuation of local public television's unique service. Federal funding, which amounted to about $1.60 per year per American, was a vital seed money for all stations, helping them make investments in their unique services and broadcast infrastructure, and leveraging the federal dollars to be matched by funding from other sources. For the stations serving rural areas, federal funding was even more important, often accounting for 30% or more of their annual budget. That reliance reflects the high infrastructure costs of serving large areas, sometimes including challenging terrain, and having a smaller population base from which to draw support from individuals, businesses, and other funders. And it is in these rural areas where there are few and sometimes no other local media sources or broadcasters, making the public television station service even more important for public safety, education, and community connections. Last July's abrupt rescission of federal funding for local public television stations, just 3 months before the next scheduled distribution of federal funding, upended that foundational public-private partnership. Almost immediately, we started to see extremely concerning negative impacts of the rescission. Some stations have been forced off the air, and many others are struggling to prevent that from happening. Every station is having to make difficult decisions. These include layoffs, ending the creation of local programmings, and many other service reductions around the country. It's important to take a moment to think about that rescission debate and to recognize that all of the rhetoric was overwhelmingly focused on concerns related to national programming, not on local station service. Yet local stations bore the greatest consequence. While the national programmers may have been the target of the rescission, the loss of federal funding has fallen most heavily on local stations who depend on it to sustain their local service. In effect, local stations became the collateral damage of the rescission that was aimed at national programming. Of the funding provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, by law, in statute, over 70% of it was required to be distributed to local public media stations. So those local stations lost that funding, and they were affected far more than the national programmers, which was perhaps the inverse of the intent. Moreover, Americans, majorities of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, support funding for public media and for public television specifically. Last year alone, through Protect My Public Media's grassroots campaign, over 2 million Americans urged their lawmakers to stand with their local stations and vote against the rescission. These Americans sent that message to Congress through over 4 million unique calls and emails. Those messages came from people across the country who care deeply about the future of their communities and fear what will happen if they become disconnected. And those people continue to speak out for the restoration of federal funding because they understand it's not optional, it's essential for societal health. We are seeing the negative impact of the rescission play out in communities across the country. Just last month, WEIU in Charleston, Illinois, was forced to end their television broadcast. Station programming will still be available via streaming, but the lack of free over-the-air public television is a loss in this rural area and a public safety risk. KWSU-TV in Pullman, Washington ceased operations at the end of December 2025 as a result of the loss of federal funding. That station served the rural Palouse region of Washington state. PBS Fort Wayne in Indiana has canceled their weekly public affairs show and one of their sub-channels that showcased local programming. This is a severe loss of local service in rural communities in Indiana. Alaska Public Media is reducing local programming, including a weekly public affairs show, and education services, including canceling camps for kids. WUCF in Orlando, Florida has postponed scheduled equipment upgrades needed to maintain their broadcast reliability, and many stations are in the position of having to delay needed infrastructure replacements as a result of a lack of funding. This situation jeopardizes public safety and their ability to transmit emergency alerts and warnings. We have 2 license holders who've made the difficult decision to stop operating their local public television stations, citing the rescission. Fortunately, other entities have stepped up to operate them, continuing as public television stations. And then overall, we have seen 550 layoffs of public media employees since the rescission vote. And that does not capture the positions that have been left unfilled at stations across the country and the services that are not being provided because of that lack of staffing. These impacts are not just limited to the smaller, more rural stations. Large stations have had significant staffing and programming cuts as well. For example, right here in the DC area, WETA has canceled 3 beloved local shows, and this past fall announced the cancellation of PBS News Weekend as a result of the rescission. These examples only scratch the surface of the rescission impacts at local stations in every community across the country. Each day, stations are making difficult decisions about where to direct scarce resources between staffing, local programming, much-needed infrastructure investment, and sometimes even continued broadcast operations. Local public television stations are doing their best to continue serving their communities with resolve and grit, but this situation is not sustainable, and the longer this disruption in the public-private partnership continues, the more dire the impact will be on the Americans who rely on their local public television stations for essential services in public safety, education, and community connections. For all of those reasons, it is essential that Congress take action to provide a federal investment in local stations to ensure that this unique, non-commercial educational service that reaches the entire country from urban to suburban, rural and remote, can continue to enrich the lives of all Americans. Providing targeted funding for local stations would support their unique service to their communities and the infrastructure that makes that possible. At America's Public Television Stations, we are working with our stations and others in the public media system to plan for the future of public media. We are looking creatively and thoughtfully at what is needed from the public investment to support local stations' ability to be successful now and in the coming years. We are not looking to relive the past. There is a strong need for public media, perhaps more than ever in the current landscape. The public investment in public media is essential to providing the services that the American people need and want. The path forward must be centered on the local public broadcasting stations, which have earned the trust of their communities and provide unique services in public safety, education, and community connections, and are deserving of public investment. Thank you.
Ms. Riley's agreed to take some questions. Who's got a question? Monty, I see you over there thinking of something.
Ask it.
Public broadcasting stations have always been at the forefront of advanced technology. By the way, I'm Gary Garland from TV Technology Magazine. What's your outlook on APTS 3.0, and also on the data services that are being proposed by many stations for BPS, broadcast positioning, satellite service, and other advanced TV services?
Yeah, thanks for that question, and thanks for the acknowledgement that public television has always been at the forefront of innovations, from closed captioning to digital broadcast. And quite a few public television stations have transitioned to APTS 3.0. We see exceptional new public service applications in APTS 3.0. And we are supporting the voluntary transition to APTS 3, trying to find ways that we can make that as easy as possible for stations and maximum flexibility. At this point, we think it's a little bit premature to set a date certain on the transition. It's critically important for us to maintain universal service, and we know that it will take some time to make sure that all of our communities and audiences are able to make that transition, and we certainly don't want anyone to be left behind, particularly the most vulnerable populations that might struggle to make the transition to APTS 3. But we do think that it is an important advancement, and we are working with our stations to try to help support them. Of course, a lack of funding right now is not helpful in making a technology transition for many of our smaller stations, so that's something that we need to continue working through to address. And then in terms of the some of the many applications in terms of data casting, we have long been supporters of data casting and the public services, especially in public safety, but also in education and in all sorts of areas that can be used by transmitting data over the broadcast spectrum. And the broadcast positioning system is an excellent example of what could be a very important complement to the GPS system for national security, and we're very proud that our local station here in DC, WHUT, is a part of the BPS project and working very closely with NAB to test that out. And we're very hopeful that we will see both BPS move forward and other applications similar to that. And I think it's important to note that given our coverage area reaching 97% of the American population, you really don't have a nationwide service without public television. And so that's something that we are very committed to finding all the public service opportunities in ATSC 3.
Thanks.
Monty?
I did think of some questions.
I'm not surprised.
Thank you for the Kate, you said that you're looking creatively and thoughtfully at what's needed for the public-private investment. Does that mean a reduced ask going forward? Is that what you're taking a look at?
What we're looking at is saying the most important thing is restoring funding into local public television stations, which while 70% of the previous funding went to local stations, 30% of it went elsewhere. So we are really looking at focusing on the part of that should come to local public television stations. What I was saying there, I think, is more that while this is a very challenging situation, it is also a moment to say, what is the public media system of the future look like? What is the public investment that can best support that? As opposed to, saying what we had was created in the 1960s. Let's say, what do we need now? So it's really thinking about how do we make sure that the investment is targeted at local stations, and also thinking creatively with our supporters in Congress and really focusing on the needs of local stations to be successful in this media landscape going forward. So there's a lot of those are conversations that are happening, and I'm sure everyone in this room would love to know exactly what's needed for each of our entities to be successful in the media landscape going forward. But I think the main takeaway is that conversation needs to be centered on the local stations because they are the heart and soul of the public media system.
I got a follow-up, and I don't want to hog it.
Monty, why don't you ask your question?
Mr. Cavallara's got a question.
When you're talking about restoring some of this funding, maybe on a more of an ad hoc basis, would there be a role for a new form of CPD, or would this be done directly through Congress?
We're open to a variety of models, and that's what we are talking to our supporters in Congress about now. What we would like to see is funding come to the local stations as efficiently as possible. That could be through a grant program operated by a federal agency. That could be through grants to the states. It could be through the creation of a new entity to shepherd that investment through to local stations. I think there's a lot of different ways that it could happen, and what we want to be most clear about is that public investment reaching stations is critical. The exact how and manner of it at this point isn't as important as ensuring that we reestablish the public-private partnership. Pat Butler. My predecessor, for those who don't know.
To what extent are viewers like us stepping in to fill the gap that's been left by federal funding? How's that working?
Yeah, so we, stations, all around the country haven't just been, sitting on their hands, hoping for the best. There have been robust efforts to try to increase fundraising, and we have seen success in a number of areas, particularly in the highly populated, economically well-off areas. And so we have several stations in more urban areas or with larger populations where they have, for year one, been able to fundraise a significant amount to close that federal funding gap. But I will say the trend overall is that fundraising peak is dropping off. We had a lot of what some people, crisis-motivated donations last year, and as you move away from a sort of action moment or a crisis moment, that those donations start to drop off. So system-wide, we are unfortunately starting to see that peak of fundraising and donations from viewers like you drop off this year. But it's also very important to note that in the more rural communities, the fundraising was never able to fill that federal funding gap, despite despite station's, best efforts and working very hard to make that happen. And this is, that goes back to the point about the challenge in particular that the rural stations face, where they have high costs of infrastructure, high cost to produce local programs like everybody, and a smaller population from which to try to secure that additional support. So we're pleased to see the support in dollars last year, but are concerned to see the trend now.
Is APTS taking a public position on the various First Amendment issues, license revocation issues that are percolating, albeit with some commercial entities as well?
We certainly have been working very hard to make sure that our licenses are respected the way that they always have been. We've had a number of our stations face different inquiries from the FCC on an individual basis. So we certainly, stand by that our stations should be treated, fairly consistent as they have been in the past, with full due process at the FCC, and we are concerned if the process starts to change, and how that would affect all broadcasters, including our own.
Which it is changing.
So we are concerned about that.
Time for one more. Maki, you want to answer your follow-up?
Yeah, you said in there that, you talked about how there's a difference between the local stations and the national programmers, and that the local stations sort of got blamed for stuff the national programmers were doing. Does that mean going forward, you guys as a unit might disassociate yourselves further from PBS, and will maybe not be synonymous with them going forward like you are right now?
I think it's important to recognize that we have always been separate, and it's a challenge in the public impression that we're not. So I think it is critically important that we continue to take that message and make that very clear how local and independent public television stations are. Public media is a complex ecosystem. No individual station can produce all of the content that they air, so it's important to have a mix of that local content, that regional content, that independent content, and the national content. So we certainly think that there's an important role for all of those groups. I do think that in terms of the importance of continuing this unique service in every community in the country, investment in the local public television stations is the highest priority, and that's what we're asking for.
Thank you so very much. Please thank our guests. This concludes our lunch. Please feel free to stay by and continue your conversations.